Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Matilda Mallinson.
And I'm Mohamed Hashim. It is Thursday, the 20th of November, 2025.
Today, we look at MBS's visit to the White House. I'll be speaking to the MEE reporters about the story they broke involving Trump weighing in on the war in Sudan.
Then I'll speak to analyst Kristen Diwan about the major takeaways from the meetup between the Saudi Crown Prince with US President Trump, including the F-35 deal.
It wasn't on Trump's charts.
And it wasn't on the list of policies to watch as news outlets geared up for the Saudi Crown Prince's first trip to the US in almost a decade.
But last week, MEE reported on a phone call between Mohamed bin Salman and the commander of the Sudanese Armed Forces, Abdul Fattah al-Burhan. MBS told the general he would lobby the US president to weigh in on Sudan's war and to strangle foreign support for Burhan's paramilitary rivals.
Now, Sudan is facing the world's biggest humanitarian crisis, with over half the population, roughly 25 million people, facing famine, displacement, and bloodshed, after a 2023 vicious power struggle descended into ruthless civil war. The need to end the violence is urgent.
But why does the Saudi prince care so much? And can the US president really do anything about it?
And I'll tell you, His Majesty would like me to do something very powerful having to do with Sudan. It was not on my my charts to be involved in that. I thought it was just something that was crazy and out of control. But I just see how important that is to you and to a lot of your friends in the room. Sudan, and we're going to start working in Sudan. I didn't think that that was one that was going to be.
To explain where this statement came from and what, if anything, will come of it, I'm joined by two MEE reporters who first broke the story. Tuning in from DC, Sean Matthews. Hello, Sean.
Hello, guys.
And joining me here in the studio, Oscar Rickett. Welcome, Oscar.
Hi, nice to be here.
Now, Trump says he is going to start working on Sudan. What does that actually mean? What is the president of the US going to do about Sudan? Sean.
I think Trump has the ability, basically, to lobby the UAE to stop its funding of the RSF. A lot of people were waiting for this kind of engagement from the White House. After we published our story showing that the Saudis were going to approach Trump on this issue, we saw Rubio, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, come out with a statement that all but kind of blamed the UAE for the war. I mean, he didn't mention the UAE, but he made a very, very strong statement and kind of said, the U.S. knows who's funding the RSF. We're not happy about it. And most people who listened to that statement understood it to mean that the U.S. was going to start cracking down. So clearly the Saudis had also telegraphed this in advance that this was a big issue for MBS. But I think what Trump is going to do is engage directly with Mohammed bin MBZ in the UAE and Yusuf Otaiba, the Emirati ambassador in Washington. So I think we will see more high-level engagement from Washington.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Now I feel like we need to just step back and understand what Saudi's involvement is in Sudan and what the UAE's involvement is in Sudan. Oscar, could you just give us a quick breakdown of the various sides of the conflict in Sudan and their various foreign relations?
So Sudan's been at war since April 2023. The war happened because of essentially, to make it quite simple, it happened because of a disagreement about whether the paramilitary rapid support forces was going to be dissolved, whether it was going to be moved into the Sudanese Armed Forces, which is Sudan's national army. Now, these two sides had been allied. The RSF chief, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who is better known as Hemeti, was the deputy to the Sudanese Armed Forces General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan. Mm-hmm. They enacted a coup in October 2021 to restore military rule to Sudan. But they fell out with each other. And they already, prior to this, had different sources of funding, different sources of wealth, and different external backers. And the key backer in this war, the key external actor in this war, has been the United Arab Emirates. The war would probably not still be happening if it wasn't for the UAE. The UAE supplies the RSF. It denies this, right? And it recently called one of our investigations, said that one of our investigations was based on fabrications, right? So we should say that. But it supplies, we have satellite imagery, we have weapons serials numbers, we have flight tracking data, we have multiple sources inside and outside Sudan, and they all say the same thing, which is the UAE supplies the RSF using supply routes that run through territory held by Khalifa Haftar in Libya, one of their allies, through Chad, and increasingly through a port called Bosaso in Somalia's Puntland region, which is a semi-autonomous region which wants to break away from Somalia.
But can you just explain why? Like, why are these Gulf states so involved in Sudan? Why is the UAE backing the RSF? Why does that bother Saudi Arabia?
So Saudi Arabia has publicly, at least, has remained neutral. We suspect privately, and obviously this has now come to the surface, that it prefers the Sudanese Armed Forces, probably because it prefers stability. Sudan has a 750-kilometer Red Sea coastline. It's just across the way from Saudi Arabia. It is perceived by Riyadh to be the more stable actor. Why does the UAE support the RSF? Well, they have an established relationship with Hemeti and his family that goes back a long way, and that involves the export of gold from gold mines that the Dagalo family control in Sudan. The Dagalo family also provided at least 40,000 Sudanese fighters for the UAE's war in Yemen. And the UAE is also engaged. A Western diplomat said to me recently, if you want to understand what the UAE is doing in Africa, then you should read William Dalrymple's book, The Anarchy, which is about the East India Company in India.
Okay.
Right? So it's an imperial project, or it's perceived to be an imperial project launched by a very small state that has more money than anyone else in the world. A citation may be needed on that. But you're talking about a place that has 10 million people, 1 million Emiratis, but they are sowing instability and they're looking to control maritime routes. They're doing essentially what the British used to do.
Okay, I see. And so now you've had Trump say he's going to step in and intervene on this on behalf of, or on the behest of, the Saudi Crown Prince. And I'm wondering here now if that relationship between Saudi Arabia and the UAE plays into this, or the relationship between MBS, Mohamed bin Salman, and MBZ, Mohammed bin Zayed, who you mentioned earlier, Sean. Is that what is really going on here? Is this an attempt by the Saudi Crown Prince to drive a wedge between Trump and the Emirati president? Sean?
One of the Western officials that we spoke with for the piece said it very much is. I mean, it's an opportunity for MBS to kind of needle the Trump-MBZ relationship a little bit. So I think there's something there. You know, MBZ really took MBS under his wing when he was coming to the fore in Saudi Arabia. But then the two leaders fell out over Yemen. And, you know, there have been other conflicts where Saudi and the UAE have taken a different approach, especially in Syria. If you look in Syria, you know, the Saudis have aligned much more closely with the Qataris and with the Turks in embracing Ahmed al-Shara. The Emiratis have been a little bit more cautious in Gaza. You know, the Saudis have sided a little bit more with the Egyptians, taking kind of this, you know, Arabist kind of core Egyptian Jordanian perspective, whereas the UAE has been much more willing to work with the Israelis kind of for some of their plans. So throughout the region, we see kind of this splintering of what many people assumed, especially in Washington, was this united front by the Saudis and the Emiratis. I will also say this. I think that the fact that MBS felt that he had to go directly to Trump on this really shows how the White House is run. You know, this is an administration that is governed really top down. Notably, you know, when Trump lifted the sanctions on Syria, he thanked two people for kind of lobbying him to make that decision. One was President Erdogan of Turkey, and the other was Mohamed bin Salman. He didn't mention his National Security Council. He didn't mention his, you know, U.S. advisors, but the two heads of state in the Middle East who, you know, he was conferring with. So again, I think the Saudis, they're very comfortable, as are all the Gulf states, honestly, operating with this kind of a White House which is governed top down. In that Oval Office meeting between Trump and MBS, we saw Trump bragging about how he can text Mohamed bin Salman at night and call him, and it's just the craziest thing, he said. So he really likes that direct engagement. And I think that's something else that we should really take away from this, which is that for something to get done in this White House, it really has to be from one leader directly to Trump. There is no kind of middle management bureaucracy really managing these files, whether it be Syria, whether it be Sudan. And Trump himself showed no interest in Sudan, right? As he himself said, right, until MBS drew it to his attention.
Now, I think, there are these political games happening at the top, but the humanitarian implications on the ground are immense. And this is probably a good moment to look at that. Oscar, could you just lay out for us exactly how devastating the violence wreaked by the RSF has been in Sudan?
So both sides have been accused of war crimes, and both sides have been legitimately accused of war crimes. But the RSF has been accused, including by the United States government, of genocide of committing genocide in Darfur. And I think one of the reasons why the UAE is now feeling a certain amount of heat is because of what has happened in al-Fasher. And al-Fasher is the capital of North Darfur. It was the last place held by the Sudanese Armed Forces. It was under siege for over 500 days. And for a long time, we were reporting, or other people were reporting as well, on what human rights activists described as an impending Srebrenica. Essentially a situation in which the RSF was going to get into the city and it was going to target people based on their ethnicity, and it was going to commit atrocities against civilians. And in the end, that is what happened. In the last month, that is what has happened. We have spoken, me and my Sudanese colleague, Mohamed Amin, we have spoken to people who fled the city, who report witnessing the mass rape of women, executions, looting. People have been held by RSF fighters, and they've been told, you need to get me, 10 million Sudanese pounds in 15 minutes. You need to get it. You need to transfer it to this banking app. You've got to do it now. And so you've had people desperately getting in touch with anyone they can think of, including people they don't know. One person described to me, going on Facebook and finding someone and sending a friend request and asking them for money. So you've had that's the sort of situation that's been happening recently. And today I was told that right now, in a lot of people who fled al-Fasher, they went to Tawila, which is a place west of al-Fasher. There are 650,000 civilians there, and there are over 300 foreign aid workers. And the RSF is 20 kilometers away at a checkpoint. This is another possibly impending catastrophe, including for Western nations who have their humanitarian workers there.
So the implications of this are immense. I mean, this is ugly. And until now, the US has avoided naming the UAE, even as it is called on arms supplies to the RSF to be suspended. I mean, here's US Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking to reporters last week.
Multiple times with multiple countries today. And I think something needs to be done to cut off the weapons and the support that the RSF is getting as they continue with their advances. I think it's telling, the humanitarian groups are telling us that some of the levels of malnutrition and suffering that they're seeing from some of these people who have been able to flee is unprecedented.
A week ago, Rubio avoided naming the UAE. Will that now change? Will Trump and the US now point the finger at the UAE? And if so, what does it mean for US-UAE relations? Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, with Trump, you never know. Trump can always call out any country that he wants. I mean, he's so unpredictable. And I'm sure the Emiratis are nervous about that. One of my sources, an Arab official in the region, told me that before Mohammed bin Salman's visit, the Emiratis were preparing for kind of a new round of U.S. pressure. So they were anticipating that the Saudis were going to go to the Americans at the highest level on this file. That was circulating in the region. That's what our sources had told us. That's why we picked up the story partly. So I think the UAE doesn't know what to expect. I guess I would caution that to say that, while there are tensions potentially over Sudan between the U.S. and the UAE, the U.S. also has economic relationship with the UAE. Just last evening, they approved the export of AI chips to the Emiratis along with the Saudis. So, Trump's not in the business of, name calling just for the sake of name calling. It's really just kind of a spur of the moment thing. I mean, we all remember back in June when Israel and Iran were at war, and Trump kind of had this expletive-ridden tirade against Iran, but also Israel, and that surprised a lot of White House watchers to see Trump go out so hard against Israel. So I think nothing's off the table, but I'm not really expecting a full course State Department or visit to the UAE that would kind of name call them. I don't think that's Trump's style. This is something that's going to be handled much more by the intelligence community. Potentially Jared Kushner, Donald Trump's son-in-law, could get involved. Steve Witkoff. And they would probably engage directly with the Nahan family. Sheikh Tahnoun, the national security advisor, would probably be consulted, and then MBZ, of course. But I wouldn't, hold my breath for a Trump banner decrying the UAE's role in Sudan.
Thank you. And then, of course, we have to ask what it means for Sudan. The war in Sudan has been devastating, and the generation waging it, well, they were victims of war growing up themselves. These scars run deep, the rifts run deep. Can the US president actually end the war in Sudan?
Yeah, I think to pick up on what Sean's saying, a Sudanese policy expert said to me this morning, this is not a victory for Sudan. This is Trump choosing between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And we have a story tomorrow, Middle East Eye has a story tomorrow about the use of the American forces using the Emirati base in Bosaso for counter-terrorism operations in Somalia. But this is the same base where a lot of the materiel is going to the RSF, right? So you've got this direct conflict on the ground between this rhetoric and reality. And again, as Sean says, the UAE is a very close ally of the US. So, and it's a close ally of Israel, and that remains the priority for the US in the region. In terms of what the US can do about Sudan, it has the cuts to the State Department mean that there's a lot of expertise has left the American government. I'm not sure it has the capacity now to do an enormous amount. Of course, it remains the most powerful country in the world, and we've seen Trump's kind of erratic kind of ability to sort of affect a certain amount of change. But I'd be very surprised if this ends up if I think at all points during this war, people have thought, oh, is the UAE actually going to back down now? And it never has. So we'll see. It may well ride it out. And on the part of the Sudanese Armed Forces, there's also not a huge desire there to stop fighting. Both sides, now that the RSF has the whole of Darfur and it has designs on returning to the capital, Khartoum, and its twin city, Omdurman, both sides, I think, still think that they might be able to win this.
Right,
and that's a dangerous
the
situation.
Sudanese Armed Forces, they're not just going to, sit down and sign a ceasefire. It looks like they actually want to recapture territory that has been taken by the RSF.
I mean, certainly they've been preparing to counter-offensives in Darfur, and there's also a kind of system behind them that's more connected to the sort of Muslim Brotherhood aligned political organizations that supported Omar Bashir, the former autocrat. There are people in this realm who also they want to reclaim some power in Sudan as well, and they're not particularly interested in ending the war either. The war economy has been quite lucrative for plenty of people, or for enough people. The smuggling of gold, the smuggling of other resources. People have been sort of doing quite well out of it.
It's going to take a lot more than rhetoric to end the the horrific scenes coming out of Sudan.
But I mean, of course, it's welcome. I mean, it was interesting watching Rubio last week because he was very fluent. You know, he was, you know, at the same time as the US is trying to kind of, you know, enact regime collapse in Venezuela, he's also he then turns around and is very eloquent on Sudan. I mean, more eloquent than I think a lot of people thought he would be. He's obviously been briefed well. He's not just saying it's a humanitarian crisis. He's talking about the general shape of a war. I think a lot of people took note of that. The question then will there be enough political and diplomatic will to get something concrete, and what will that actually look like?
Yeah, so there's plenty to keep watching with the story, and it's great. We will keep an eye out for your story coming out tomorrow. My final question, Sean, is that MBS's US visit is now over, and I can't help but wonder, what about Gaza? We haven't really heard of any solid progress being made off the back of these talks regarding Trump's peace plan or the question of reconstruction. Is this an indication that Gaza has somewhat fallen off the agenda?
I think that's what a lot of people were concerned about. It's pretty notable that when Trump was in the Oval Office with MBS, you know, they were asked about whether the Saudis, one of the reporters asked whether the Saudis would contribute money for the reconstruction. And MBS kind of hummed and hawed and said something like, we'll see. And Trump interjected and he said he's going to give a lot of money. And he kind of spoke up for the Saudi leader. So he was pledging Saudi funds. And I think MBS was, you know, he was holding back. I think basically for the Saudis, I don't think Gaza was on the top of MBS's agenda for this visit, to be honest with you. I think what the Saudis wanted to do was actually just kind of sideline the issue of Gaza and even the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, because they don't want to be boxed into having a discussion about the Abraham Accords, because MBS has been very clear about that, right? He wants to kind of disentangle all of these goodies and items that he wants from the U.S. that the Biden administration had linked to normalization, like the F-35, like civilian nuclear technology, AI technology. His goal was to basically disentangle all that from the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which was, you know, that the Saudis would normalize with Israel and then get some American goodies in return. And I think MBS effectively did that. You know, he basically brought the relationship back to the bilateral level, which was the U.S. and Saudi Arabia negotiating sales of technology and arms and cooperation, with the Israeli-Palestinian issue sidelined. So that was the Saudi objective. So I think the Saudis were reluctant potentially to even bring up Gaza to begin with. I do think it's notable, though, that yesterday the Yemeni government, backed by Saudi Arabia, the internationally recognized government of Yemen, said that they were willing to contribute troops to an international peacekeeping force in Gaza. Obviously, they have very, very close ties to the Saudis. They're financially backed by them. So that might have been some signal from the Saudis that they asked their Yemeni allies to send to the Americans as kind of a nod. But I think one of the concerns that we've been, you know, very, I think, on top of as a news organization is this issue of what is the follow-up on Gaza? How engaged will the U.S. be? You know, Oscar rightly said that you know, the State Department has been gutted. So I think he's very right to say that. Witkoff is, you know, in and out of the White House. He's in Miami. He's talking to the Russians now about Ukraine. So I think there is a sense that potentially Gaza has fallen off the agenda. And of course, we saw the Israeli strikes, so the genocide continues.
Well, my colleague Mo Hashim will be speaking more about that in the interview that follows, so make sure you stay tuned for that. For the time being, Sean Matthews, Oscar Rickett, thank you so much for joining me today. The US president has now pledged to end the war in Sudan, adding to a long line of peace proposals that he claims to have steered. But Gaza, for one, remains fragile and unfinished. When it comes to peace, Trump can talk the talk, but can he follow through?
Peacemaker and unifier. That's what I want to be, a peacemaker and a unifier. As you know, we had a historic ceasefire. We ended the war in Gaza. And 2 days ago, incredibly, the United Nations Security Council backed the Trump peace plan, and we have a great peace plan. We have peace in the Middle East. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime. Blessed are the peacemakers. I made peace. Remember, Hillary said, he will take us into war. No, I took us out of all these wars. So I hope that my greatest legacy, however, will be as a peacemaker and a unifier. I want to bring peace, not war. Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the horrible war between Russia and Ukraine totally settled. I'll have it done in 24 hours. But I'll be your peacemaker, and I am the only candidate who can make this promise to you. I will prevent World War III.
Now, Trump's statement on Sudan is just one of several major outcomes from MBS's three-day visit with US President Donald Trump. Now, perhaps the main thing to note is just how cozy things look between the two leaders.
When a reporter asked about the human rights issues that have long overshadowed US-Saudi relations, Donald Trump leapt to his guest's defense and slandered the man whose brutal killing was deemed by CIA intelligence to have been directly ordered by MBS.
Your Royal Highness, the U.S. intelligence concluded that you orchestrated the brutal murder of a journalist. 9/11 families are furious that you are here in the Oval Office.
Who are you with?
Why should Americans trust you?
Who are you with? No, who are you with?
I'm with ABC News, sir.
You're with who?
ABC News, sir.
Fake news. As far as this gentleman is concerned, he's done a phenomenal job. You're mentioning somebody that was extremely controversial. A lot of people didn't like that gentleman that you're talking about. Whether you like him or didn't like him, things happen. But he knew nothing about it, and we can leave it at that. You don't have to embarrass our guest by asking a question like that.
The two leaders discussed business opportunities, weapons, defense, AI, and tech, signaling Trump's vision of US relations with a new Middle East founded on financial investment and partnership.
It was nothing short of a warm welcome, with opulent displays of hospitality at the White House that were rewarded with a $1 trillion investment pledge by the Saudi Crown Prince.
In turn, Saudi Arabia was bumped up to the status of major non-NATO ally to the US and signed a strategic defense deal granting them historic access to US military technology.
Now, the leaders also discussed the Abraham Accords, Trump reiterating the desire for Saudi Arabia to normalize relations with Israel. And MBS expressed Saudi support for a US deal with Iran.
What does all this mean for the Middle East, for America, and for one particular world leader who'll likely have been watching from the wings, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, joining me now to provide answers is Kristen Diwan from the Arab Gulf States Institute, and she joins us now from Washington, D.C. Kristen, it's good to see you.
Hi, good to be with you.
I want to start off by asking you really about the significance of this F-35 deal, the 48 jets that the Trump administration said that they will sell to Saudi Arabia.
Well, it's definitely a huge move. We know that traditionally the United States always tries to preserve the comparative advantage of Israel and the Middle East region. So the idea that they've been willing to sell, this top line equipment, first offered, of course, to the Emiratis and now to the Saudis is quite a statement. And it definitely speaks to something that the Saudis want, which is to have a much more secure, long-standing strategic relationship with the United States that they think will help secure their future.
Actually, that's something that we should unpack. You talk about the UAE, the fact that they are doing this to the Saudis and not the Emiratis. So the context here is that Trump in his first term actually agreed to sell these jets to the UAE. And even Israel wasn't objecting back then. Now, the deal collapsed under Biden. And I think the question that people are asking is, why should the Saudis believe that this is different, that this time it's different, especially now that they're actually facing more opposition from the Israelis and also the U.S. Pentagon?
Yes. Well, I think it is true that we're going to have to wait. It is a longer process before they actually get those jets, although it was quite interesting at the investment conference yesterday. Trump was kind of saying, well, I can sign off of it in like a week or two. I think he said 2 weeks, he can get it done. So he obviously is confident that he can push this through, but it is something that will have some opposition in Congress. And there's also a lot of negotiations about what having these jets means in Saudi Arabia, the kind of restrictions on them, that I'm sure the Saudis are going to have to look at a lot of those very closely. So I don't think this is something that's a completely done deal. And what happened with Emiratis definitely kind of gives us an idea where things can still not be executed fully.
Mm. And what about Israel's objection or Israel's opposition to this? I mean, what is it that they find with the Saudi Arabia deal that they didn't have with the UAE back in 2020? I mean, is it because Israel's worried that the Trump administration isn't going to be using the F-35 jet deal as leverage for normalization with Israel, for example?
Well, I think it's just that as well, that UAE has signed a normalization agreement. They have strengthened their ties with Israel, although I guess they're quite a bit more strained now. But they have those agreements and understanding and coordination on many levels. That isn't the case with Saudi Arabia. So I think obviously it sets a new precedent that I think that they weren't even happy with the first arrangement. I think they definitely wouldn't be happy with this one.
Well, actually, let's talk about this precedent right now, because this whole deal, if it goes through, what does it indicate to you about the U.S.-Saudi relations? I mean, the separation of this deal from normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel, does this indicate that Saudi's influence in the United States with the Trump administration is possibly overriding Israel's?
I think it does. And I think it speaks to a couple of things. One, we know even under the Biden administration, the relations with Saudi Arabia had been improving quite a lot. And even at that time, the Saudis were hinting that maybe they could go forward with these negotiations, get quite far in a discussion of a security agreement without having to go forward on normalize. So trying to separate the two tracks of their security relationship with the United States and their relationship with Israel. And I think now we're seeing that actually achieved to some degree, that they're getting a lot of these understandings and progress and solidifying their strategic relationship with the United States without doing that. And I think it speaks to the relation with Saudi Arabia, how much they've shown themselves to be such an important player in a lot of issues that the United States cares about. And also, I think, shows the Trump administration's willingness to kind of balance its two interests between Israel and all of the Gulf states, really. We just saw, of course, the major security guarantees that the Trump administration gave to Qatar as well. Yeah. So I think that is something that's quite new in the relationship, that they want to stay on very good terms with both, and that Israel may not get its full wish list and all of these decisions.
Can I ask you to expand on this balance that you're referring to right now, about balancing between its relationship with Israel and also the relationship with other states in the region?
Yeah, well, I think, the Gulf states have a lot to bring to the United States. We know, obviously, the energy equation has always been very important, and we saw how that really moved the needle with the Biden administration. We know that there's a lot of financial and economic benefits that can come from strategic relations with the Gulf states. And I think they've shown their importance to just in a lot of different strategic things moving forward. Even if we want to see the Gaza agreement going forward in the way they want to, they really need the Gulf states to come on board to secure that and to be financial, kind of players in that will help to move the agreement forward. So I think all of those demand that the United States listen to what the Gulf state demands are. And it's interesting, will be interesting to see exactly how that plays out when we look towards Gaza, in fact, and the passage that we just saw the Trump plan there. Indeed.
And you also mentioned financial players. Let's speak about the investment, the big figure that everyone's kind of been highlighting, the $1 trillion pledge by Saudi Arabia to invest in the United States. But before I ask you, we actually have a clip to play for you, Kristen. Listen to this.
In many areas, in technology, in AI, in earth materials, magnet, etc., that will create a lot of investment opportunities.
So you are doing that now. You're saying to me now that the 600 billion will be 1 trillion.
Definitely, because what we are signing, it will facilitate that, and
I like that very much.
You work hard.
No, that's great. I appreciate that. That's great. We're doing numbers that nobody's ever done. And in all fairness, if you didn't see potential in the U.S., you wouldn't be doing that.
Definitely.
You don't want to lose money.
As you said, Mr. President.
And just like you heard that, Kristen, so back in May, Saudi Arabia pledged $600 billion investment in the United States. Now it's $1 trillion. So I think, again, the question that people are asking, this is such a large sum. And with Saudi Arabia, their GDP is around 1.3 trillion. So investing a sum that's almost as large as their GDP strikes you as what?
Yeah, I mean, well, you could hear what President Trump said right there. numbers that we've never even heard before. You know, he definitely wants to hit those targets of being the highest ever, biggest ever.
Yep.
And I think the Saudis understand that, and they're willing to play that game. I think when you do look at the solid reality of the economic, you know, obviously Saudi Arabia has a lot of economic leverage, but they do have constraints, and they're trying to invest very much in their own transformation and to draw investors to their country. So I have a feeling when we look at this $1 trillion, first off, it's certainly not going to be $1 trillion in any short period of time. It would be a very lengthy amount of time to be able to spend that much money. And then I think when we look at the package that they're going to be doing, the things that they listed, buying AI, doing some more exploration of critical minerals, a lot of these different technologies, they will be definitely investing that in Saudi Arabia. So it'll be interesting to see the different balance between those two things, how much the investments will be in the United States and how much will be in Saudi Arabia, but with American firms.
Mm. And so you think this is more of a case of just Trump throwing big numbers to his base?
Well, it's kind of the entry for playing. I mean, I imagine there'll still be pressure on that. I noticed during the investment conference, even throughout, that maybe we could get that even higher, above $1 trillion. So the pressure will be there for the Saudis to coordinate. I saw that in the financial agreement, there were also some talks about the Saudis continuing and commitments to treasury bonds as well to keep their money in the United States. So this does speak to a long-term strategic tie where the Saudis are going to have the U.S. as their main sort of investing partner, I think. But I just think the numbers are a little bit, are going to be hard to hit.
I have one last question for you, Kristen, before I let you go. And this is not too off topic, but it's related to sports and politics. So we saw Cristiano Ronaldo at the White House, I guess with the Saudi delegation. There's a lot to be said here. I'm curious to get your reaction. I bring this up because I've also seen some reactions on social media from Palestinians, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, who are big fans of Ronaldo. They've idolized him for a large number of their lives. But at the same time, seeing him, in the White House, seeing him with Donald Trump, the man that a lot of Palestinians see and, as the person funding the genocide, gives them a bit of a moral dilemma, gives them a bit of an issue in terms of, their approach to how they see Ronaldo. So your reaction to having Ronaldo in the White House?
Yeah, I think it's certainly sort of the new world we live in where, we all know that these soccer, as we call them, football stars are enormous personalities with enormous pull. And countries know that, and they've been kind of employing, in a way, these stars to help with their broader connections and appeal. And that's definitely the case with Ronaldo in Saudi Arabia. He actually has that signed as part of his agreement with signing with the football club. He also signed to be a spokesperson for Saudi Arabia and Saudi tourism. I also found it quite striking, though, that here he was part of basically the diplomatic delegation of Saudi Arabia. So I think definitely that kind of dilemma of connection of sports stars to states is something that we will continue to see. Of course, in this case, it's very much Ronaldo connected to Saudi Arabia. And I think you can look at him as being part of their outreach in the United States, and pretty effective one, I think.
Now for today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we want to hear from you.
Please send us your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email MEELive@middleeasteye.net.
We'll be here at 5 p.m. BST, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday.
See you then.